The air in Hollow Pines carried a damp, pine-scented chill, the kind that clung to your skin and whispered of secrets buried beneath the towering evergreens. It was a small town carved into the rugged foothills of the Cascades, where mist hung low over clapboard houses and the river's constant murmur was the only sound louder than the gossip. For years, Clara Henshaw had called it Home 32. Sharp-eyed and quietly resilient, she ran the town's only bookstore, the Fox and Page, a cozy refuge of creaking shelves and faded armchairs. To the locals, she was a fixture, dependable, solitary, the woman who always had a paperback in hand and a polite smile ready. But Clara carried a weight no one saw, a shadow stitched into the seams of her life. It started with the letter. She found it tucked inside a returned library book-a-worn copy of Wuthering Heights slipped back onto the counter by Mrs. Tillman, the florist with a knack for forgetting due dates. The envelope was yellowed, unsealed, and bore no stamp, just Clara's name scrawled in a jagged hand she didn't recognize. Inside was a single line: "I know what you left behind in Seattle." Her breath caught, a cold fist tightening around her ribs. Seattle was a life she'd buried 8 years ago, a past of late-night arguments, a fiancé named Daniel, and a mistake that still woke her in a sweat. She'd fled that city, rebuilt herself in Hollow Pines, told no one. Who could know? The bell above the shop door jingled, snapping her from her spiral. It was Owen Carver, the town's handyman, broad-shouldered, with a crooked grin and eyes that lingered a beat too long. "Morning, Clara. Got that order of poetry books in yet?" His voice was warm, easy, but today it grated against her nerves. She forced a nod, sliding the letter into her apron pocket. "Just unpack them. Give me a sec." As she turned to the stockroom, her mind raced. Owen had moved to Hollow Pines 2 years back, quiet about his past, always asking questions, small ones, harmless ones. "Where'd you grow up, Clara? Ever miss the city?" She'd brushed them off, but now they echoed differently. The day unraveled in a blur. Customers came and went, their chatter a dum against the storm brewing in her head. By dusk, with the shop empty and the sky bruising purple, she locked up and headed home, a small cabin on the edge of town, its porch sagging under years of neglect. She poured a glass of wine, the letter burning a hole in her pocket, when a sharp knock rattled the door. Her hand froze mid-sip. "Clara, it's me." Owen's voice muffled through the wood. She hesitated, pulse thudding, then opened it a crack. He stood there, raindrops beating on his jacket, holding a damp envelope identical to the one she'd found. "This was on your porch," he said, his brow creasing. "Looks important." Her stomach dropped as she took it, her fingers brushing the soggy paper. Same jagged handwriting. She tore it open, Owen watching, and read the words aloud before she could stop herself. "Check your bank account. The truth costs more than you think." "What the hell does that mean?" Owen asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer, shoving past him to her laptop. With trembling hands, she logged into her bank, something she rarely checked. Living paycheck to paycheck. The screen loaded, and her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her balance glared back at her. $50,000. A deposit made that morning from an account labeled D. Marshall. Daniel, her ex-fiancé. The man she'd left after betraying him, in a way she'd never spoken aloud. Owen's hand brushed her shoulder. "Clara, what's going on?" She recoiled, the room spinning. The money, the letters, someone knew. Someone was pulling strings. And then she saw it, a shadow moving past her window, quick and deliberate, vanishing into the pines. Her voice barely broke a whisper. "Someone's out there." The cabin fell silent, save for the river's distant roar and the hammering of her heart. Owen grabbed a flashlight, his jaw tight. "Stay here." He stepped onto the porch, the beam cutting through the mist, and Clara clutched the second letter, its ink smearing under her grip. The truth was unraveling, and it was closer than she'd ever feared. The beam of Owen's flashlight sliced through the mist like a blade, illuminating twisted branches, and the slick, muddy ground beyond Clara's porch. She stood frozen in the doorway, the damp night air seeping into her bones, her mind a tangle of panic and disbelief. $50,000. Daniel's name. The shadow outside her window. It was as if the past had clawed its way out of the grave she dug for it, and now it was stalking her through the pines. Owen's voice cut through the silence. Nothing out here, Clara. Tracks maybe, but the rain's washing them out fast. He stepped back onto the porch, his boots leaving wet smears on the weathered boards. His hazel eyes searched hers, steady but probing. You gonna tell me what's happening? Or do I have to guess? She clutched the letter tighter, the paper crumpling in her fist. It's personal. The words tasted like ash. Personal didn't cover it. Betrayal, guilt, a life she'd torched and fled. 8 years ago, she'd been Daniel Marshall's fiancée, living in a sleek Seattle condo with a view of the Sound. She'd loved him, or thought she had, until the late nights at her accounting firm turned into something else. Stolen hours with a coworker, a reckless fling that ended with her siphoning $10,000 from Daniel's savings to cover a debt she couldn't explain. When he'd confronted her, she hadn't confessed. She'd run. Hollow Pines was supposed to be her clean slate. Now, that slate was cracking. She forced herself to meet Owen's gaze. Someone's messing with me. That's all you need to know. Her tone was sharper than she meant. But he didn't flinch. All right, he said, voice low. But if they're out there, I'm not leaving you alone. He set the flashlight on the porch rail, rain dripping from his hair. And for a moment, she wanted to believe he was just the handyman with a kind streak. But those questions he'd asked over the years, ever missed the city, gnawed at her. Could he be part of this? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter inside, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. Her stomach lurched. She grabbed it, Owen hovering close, and answered on speaker. A voice crackled through low, distorted, like it was filtered through static. Clara Henshaw, did you think the money was a gift? A pause, then a dry chuckle. Look under the floorboard by your stove. We'll talk soon. The line went dead. Clara's breath hitched, her eyes darting to the kitchen. Owen frowned, stepping inside. What floorboard? She didn't answer, just crossed the room in a daze, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. The stove sat squat and ancient, its chipped enamel a relic of the cabin's previous owner. She knelt, running her fingers along the boards until one shifted a loose plank, barely noticeable. Owen crouched beside her, his presence too close, too warm. She pried it up with shaking hands. Beneath lay a small metal box, rusted at the edges, no lock. Her heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside was a photograph, creased and faded. Her and Daniel, arms around each other, laughing on a pier with Seattle's skyline behind them. Scrawled across her face in red ink, liar. Tucked beside it was a flash drive, unlabeled, its black plastic gleaming in the dim light. Owen whistled softly. That's you, huh? Who's the guy? His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Clara snapped the box shut, heat rising in her chest. None of your business. She stood, clutching it to her chest, the flash drive a live wire in her mind. What was on it? Proof of her theft? Something worse? Outside, the rain intensified, drumming the roof like impatient fingers. Owen straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. You're scared, Clara. I get it. But you're not telling me enough to help. His voice softened. I'm not your enemy here. She wanted to believe him. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. I need to figure this out alone, she said, stepping back. Thanks for checking outside. You should go. He hesitated, then nodded, grabbing his flashlight. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone with the box, the phone, and a past that refused to stay dead. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears. The screen flickered, then loaded a single video file. She clicked play. Grainy footage filled the screen. A dark room, a figure in shadow, and a voice, Daniel's voice, unmistakable after all these years. Clara, if you're watching this, it means I found you, and it means you're going to pay. The camera panned to a calendar on the wall, dated 3 weeks ago. Then, a sound of sharp, metallic click, like a gun being cocked. The screen cut to black. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Daniel was alive. He knew where she was, and he was coming. Clara stumbled back from the laptop, her chair scraping against the floorboards as the black screen stared back at her like an unblinking eye. Daniel's voice low, deliberate, edged with a fury she'd never heard in their years, together looped in her mind. You're going to pay. The metallic click at the end of the video replayed too, sharp and final, a sound she couldn't unhear. Her cabin, once a sanctuary, felt like a trap closing in, walls too thin, the windows too exposed. Rain lashed against the glass, blurring the world beyond into a watery smear. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone Daniel, or whoever was pulling these strings, was out there watching. She glanced at the metal box, still clutched in her hands. The photograph of her and Daniel, taunting her from within. The red liar scrawled across her face wasn't just an accusation, it was a brand. A reminder of the night she'd shattered his trust. She told herself it was a one-time lapse, a desperate grab at his money to pay off a debt from her fling, a mistake born of panic and shame. But the truth was uglier. She'd planned it, however briefly, and when he'd caught her, she hadn't fought to explain. She'd packed a bag and vanished into the night, leaving him with nothing but questions. Now, those questions had found her. She set the box down and paced the small kitchen, the loose floorboard creaking underfoot. $50,000 in her account, 5 times what she'd taken. Was it a taunt? A lure? Her phone sat silent on the counter, but the distorted voice from the call gnawed at her. Look under the floorboard, we'll talk soon. It hadn't been Daniel's voice and not exactly, but it carried the same weight, the same menace. Someone else was in on this, someone close. A sharp rap at the door jolted her from her thoughts. She froze, her breath shallow. Owen had left 10 minutes ago. Had he come back? Or was it? She crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. A figure stood on the porch, slight and hunched, a hood pulled low. Not Owen's broad frame. Her heart thudded as she grabbed a kitchen knife from the block, its weight cold and unsteady in her hand. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cracking. "Clara, it's Mila." The voice was soft, familiar. Clara exhaled, lowering the knife. Lila Grayson, the town's librarian, all wiry frame and nervous energy, stepped inside as Clara opened the door. Her raincoat dripped onto the floor, and her gray eyes flicked around the cabin, wide with something like fear. "I saw your light on. I needed to talk to you." Clara frowned, setting the knife down but keeping it within reach. "It's late, Lila. What's wrong?" The woman was a friend, sort of quiet, bookish, always dropping by the shop with recommendations, but she'd never shown up, unannounced like this. Lila wrung her hands, water pooling at her feet. "I found something today. In the library basement, where we keep the old records. It's about you." She reached into her coat and pulled out a damp folder, its edges curling. Clara's stomach twisted as Lila opened it, revealing a photocopy of a newspaper clipping. The headline hit like a punch. "Seattle woman disappears after embezzlement scandal." Below it, a grainy photo of Clara younger, her hair longer, stared back at her. The article was dated 8 years ago, detailing her sudden departure from Daniel's life, and the missing $10,000, though no charges had been filed. "Where did you get this?" Clara's voice was a whisper, her hands trembling as she took the paper. The room tilted. "It was in a box labeled Hollow Pines Residence," Lila said, her words tumbling out. "Someone's been collecting things, articles, photos, notes. There's more in there, Clara, about other people too, but yours, it was on top, like someone wanted it found. I didn't know what to do, but I thought you should." A crash outside cut her off, a sharp, splintering sound, like glass breaking. Clara spun toward the window, her pulse racing. The rain had eased, and through the mist she saw it. Her car parked by the shed, its driver's side window shattered. A figure darted away from it, vanishing into the trees before she could make out more than a vague shape. "Oh my God," Lila gasped, clutching Clara's arm. "Was that?" Clara didn't answer. She grabbed her coat and the knife, adrenaline surging. "Stay here," she snapped, shoving the folder into Lila's hands. She stepped onto the porch, the night air biting at her skin, and scanned the darkness. The car sat slumped in the mud, its broken window a jagged mouth. Something glinted on the driver's seat, a small object. Catching the faint glow from the cabin, she approached, her boots sinking into the wet earth, and leaned in. It was a key, old, tarnished, attached to a tag that read, Unit 17, Pineview Storage. Her breath caught. She didn't own a storage unit, but she knew who might. Daniel had kept one in Seattle, a place for his old furniture, his memory-sure memories. Had he moved it here? Or was this another piece of the game? Behind her, Lila's voice trembled from the porch. "Clara, get back inside. What if they're still out there?" But Clara barely heard her. The key felt heavy in her palm, a tether to a past she couldn't outrun. She turned back to the cabin, her mind racing. The video, the money, the letters know this. Whoever was doing this wanted her to follow the trail. She stepped inside, locking the door behind her, and faced Lila. "I need your car," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "There's something I have to do." Lila paled. "Now, Clara, this is insane. You can't just—" "I have to." Clara cut in, grabbing her phone and the flash drive. "Stay here. Lock the doors. I'll be back." She didn't wait for a reply, snatching Lila's keys from her coat pocket and heading into the night. Pineview Storage was 10 miles out, a cluster of rusted units on the edge of town. Whatever waited there, it was the next move in this twisted chess game. As she drove, the rain picked up again, pounding the windshield. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, an unknown number. She answered, her voice tight. "What do you want?" That distorted voice crackled through again. "Unit 17. You're getting warmer, Clara, but you're not alone out there. Better hurry." The line went dead, and in the rearview mirror she saw headlights flicker to life, trailing her through the dark. The headlights in Clara's rearview mirror burned like twin embers, steady and unyielding against the curtain of rain. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel of Lila's beat-up hatchback, the engine whining as she pushed it harder down the winding road toward Pineview Storage. The wipers slapped frantically, barely keeping up with the downpour, and the key to Unit 17 sat heavy in her coat pocket, its jagged edges pressing into her thigh. "You're not alone out there," the distorted voice had said, and now those words pulsed in her skull, sinking with the thud of her heart. Whoever was behind this, Daniel or someone else, they were close, and they were watching. The road twisted through the pines, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Clara's mind raced as fast as the car. The video of Daniel, the gun's click, the $50,000 deposited all pointed to him, but the pieces didn't fit cleanly. He'd been heartbroken when she left, not vengeful. Had 8 years twisted him into this? Or was someone using his name, his pain, to unravel her? The newspaper clipping Lila found suggested a deeper game. Someone in Hollow Pines had been digging into her past, and now they were baiting her with it. The headlights behind her flared brighter, the vehicle gaining ground. She cursed under her breath, glancing at the speedometer. 55, too fast for these slick curves, but slowing down wasn't an option. Pineview Storage was 2 miles out, a squat grid of metal units hunched behind a chain-link fence. If she could get there, unlock Unit 17, maybe she'd find answers or a way to turn this around. Her phone buzzed again on the seat, but she ignored it. The vibrant a taunt she couldn't afford to heed. The turnoff came fast, a gravel spur veering right, marked by a faded sign half swallowed by vines. She yanked the wheel, tires skidding as the car fishtailed onto the path. The headlights followed, relentless, and for a split second, she caught the glint of a dark SUV in the mirror, sleek, unfamiliar, not a Hollow Pines regular. Her stomach knotted. This wasn't some local playing a prank. This was calculated. The storage lot emerged from the mist, its floodlights flickering weakly against the night. Clara slammed on the brakes, the hatchback sliding to a stop near the gate. It was unlocked, hanging ajar. Someone had been here. She grabbed the key in her phone, shoving the knife into her coat, and bolted out into the rain. The SUV screeched to a halt behind her, its engine growling, but no one emerged. Not yet. She sprinted through the rows of units, their rusted numbers blurring past 12, 14, 16, until she reached 17. The door was dented, its padlock dangling loose, already cut. Her breath hitched. This wasn't her doing. She pushed it up with a groan of metal, the darkness inside swallowing the faint light. The air smelled of mildew and gasoline, thick and cloying. She fumbled for her phone, switching on its flashlight, and swept the beam across the space. Boxes. Stacks of them, labeled in Daniel's meticulous handwriting. Photos, books, keepsakes. Her chest tightened. This was his storage unit, transplanted from Seattle, a time capsule of their old life. But in the center sat something new. A folding table, and on it a laptop, its screen glowing faintly. Beside it lay a handwritten note. "Play me." Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside, slow and deliberate. Clara's pulse spiked. She darted to the table, hitting play on the laptop before she could second guess it. Daniel's face filled the screen holder. Gaunt, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He stared into the camera, his voice raw. "Clara, if you're here, it's because you had no choice. I didn't want this, but you took more than money that night. You took everything." He leaned closer, eyes glinting. "I tracked you down 2 years ago. Hollow Pines. Thought I'd let it go. Then someone found me. Offered me a deal. The money's your if you confess. Publicly. Tonight. Or they finish what I couldn't." The video froze on his face, mid-sentence, as if cut off. Confess? To what? The theft? The betrayal? And who was they? Clara's hands shook as she processed it. 2 years ago, that's when Owen arrived in town. Was he the someone Daniel meant? Or... A shadow fell across the doorway. She spun, knife in hand, to see a figure silhouetted against the rain-tall, hooded, holding something that glinted. "Drop it, Clara." A voice rasped, not distorted this time, but unfamiliar, cold. "You're out of moves." She backed against the table, the laptop's glow casting eerie shadows. The figure stepped closer, and the glint resolved into a gun, steady in their grip. Her mind screamed for a plan, but the key in her pocket, the video, the headlights, it all collided into one brutal truth. She'd been lured here, and the trap was springing shut. Then, a second set of headlights flared outside, tires skidding on gravel. A shout Owen's voice cut through the rain. "Clara!" The figure flinched, half turning, and in that split second, she lunged, slamming the knife toward their arm. Metal met flesh, a grunt of pain, and the gun clattered to the floor. She dove for it, as the figure staggered back, blood dripping onto the concrete. Owen burst in, flashlight blinding, his face a mask of shock. What the hell? The hooded figure bolted past him, vanishing into the night. Clara gripped the gun, her hands slick with rain and fear, and pointed it at the darkness where they'd fled. Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. "Owen, tell me right now, who are you working for?" He raised his hands, eyes wide. "Clara, I swear, I'm not. I saw Lila's car followed you. Who was that?" But before he could finish, her phone buzzed again, insistent, and the screen lit up with a single text from an unknown number. "Confess by midnight, or Hollow Pines burns." The clock on the laptop read 11:42. Clara stood in the gazebo, the rain a soft hiss against the roof, as her phone trembled in her hands. The text glared back at her. "Confess by midnight, or Hollow Pines burns." 11:42. 18 minutes to decide. The gun she'd taken from the storage unit rested heavy in her waistband. The laptop with Daniel's video hummed faintly on the railing, and Owen lingered at her side, His flashlight beamed cutting through the mist. Her confessioner, past with Daniel, the affair, the stolen $10,000 loomed like a storm ready to break. But the threat to the town, to the life she'd built, pinned her in place. "Clara, we need to move," Owen said, his voice urgent but steady. "Whoever's doing this, they're close. I'll drive you wherever you need to go." She shook her head, eyes locked on the phone. 11:44. No running this time. Her voice was raw, resolute. "They want me to confess publicly? Fine, but I'm doing it my way." She grabbed the laptop, its battery warning blinking red, and opened her phone's camera app. Live stream. The square was empty, the town asleep under the rain. But this would reach whoever was watching Daniel, the voice, the shadow pulling the strings. She hit record, the red dot a heartbeat in the dark. "My name is Clara Henshaw," she began, rain dripping from her hair. 8 years ago, I lived in Seattle with Daniel Marshall. I betrayed him. I had an affair, stole $10,000 from him, and ran. I've been hiding in Hollow Pines ever since." Her voice steadied, the weight shifting as she spoke. "I thought I could bury it. I was wrong. Someone's been threatening me, threatening this town, to make me admit it. So here it is. I'm sorry, Daniel. I hurt you, I own that. But I'm done being hunted." 11:58. She exhaled, ending the stream, and the silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Owen watched her, his expression a mix of awe and worry. "You think that'll stop them?" Before she could answer, headlights pierced the square Lila's hatchback, rolling to a stop. Clara tensed, her hand brushing the gun, as the driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, limping, hood up, the arm she'd stabbed at the storage unit wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Owen raised his flashlight, but Clara already knew. "Lila," she whispered, stepping forward. The librarian pushed back her hood, rain streaking her glasses, a wry smile twisting her lips. "You're braver than I thought, Clara." Her voice was sharp, stripped of its usual nerves. "Daniel hired me a year ago. PI gig. He wanted you found, wanted you to squirm, but I took it further." Clara's blood ran cold. "The money, the threats. That was you?" Lila nodded, leaning against the car. "He sent the $50,000 to lure you out, but I wrote the letters, made the calls, kept him in the dark about the details. He's in Seattle, watching your little show right now." She tapped her phone, its screen glowing with Clara's live stream replay. "I told him it'd break you. Didn't expect you to actually do it." "Why?" Clara's voice cracked, fury rising. "What did I ever do to you?" "Not personal," Lila said, shrugging. "Profit. Daniel paid me to dig. I sold your story to a tabloid this morning, small town runaway big city scandal. Your confession just sealed the deal. Midnight was my deadline for the bonus." She glanced at her watch. 12:01. 2 threats now. You're free, in a way. Clara stared, the pieces clicking into place. The shadow outside her cabin, the key, the video all Lila's game, built on Daniel's grudge. She stepped closer, rain soaking her through, and Owen moved to her side, tense but silent. "You almost burned my life down for a paycheck," Clara said, low and fierce. "Was it worth it?" Lila's smirk faltered, just for a second. "You'll survive, always do." She turned back to the car, but Clara's voice stopped her cold. "Number." Clara pulled out her phone, dialing as she spoke. "You don't get to walk away." The line clicked, and Sheriff Tate's gruff voice answered. "Tate, it's Clara Henshaw. I've got a confession and evidence. Lila Grayson's been blackmailing me. Storage Unit 17, Pineview View. Video, documents, blood. She's here now." Lila froze, eyes widening. "You wouldn't." "I just did," Clara said, hanging up. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing louder. Lila bolted for the car, but Owen stepped forward, blocking her path. "Stay put," he said, voice hard. "You've done enough." The rain eased as red and blue lights flashed into the square. Sheriff Tate's cruiser pulled up, and within minutes, Lila was cuffed, her protest drowned by the storm's last gasps. Clara handed over the laptop. The gun, the ivory shred of proof, and watched as the woman who'd orchestrated her nightmare was led away. Tate turned to her, rain dripping from his hat. "You all right, Henshaw?" She nodded, exhaustion crashing in. "I will be." Her bank app pinged $50,000 gone. But the $10,000 she'd stolen sat untouched. A quiet amends from Daniel, maybe. She'd send it back, start clean. Owen lingered as the cruiser drove off, his flashlight dimming. "You didn't have to trust me," he said softly. "Thanks for that." She met his gaze, a faint smile breaking through. "You earned it." The square was still, the town safe, her secret laid bare, but no longer a weapon. Hollow pines stretched out around her, its pines whispering in the wind, and for the first time in years, Clara felt the shadow lift. The past was done. She'd faced Titanned one.